Greetings, Seekers, and welcome back to DungeonFog once again. In this video, we are going to be looking at perhaps the most unique feature of DungeonFog in its entirety. Certainly what, in my opinion, separates it from most of the other types of map-making platforms that are out there, and that is the dynamic lighting feature, or more specifically, the lighting tool. I mentioned back in the assets video that when you place an asset down that is already determined as being pre-lit in its name, for example, this lit torch, when I place it down, DungeonFog automatically treats it as a light emitter, which means that it is going to cast light from the source, the asset itself, as soon as you place it on the map. Once you place down an asset and select it as a light emitter, what will happen is these sets of circles will appear. And each circle will control a different property of that light source. And in order to show you exactly how that works in real time, hence the dynamic lighting tool, I have brought up the properties down here so you can see exactly what each circle is going to be interacting with, starting with the gray circle at the back. When you hover over it, you can see the hand icon appear. When you press and hold it, then you can start manipulating that feature there. And what I am doing is I am actually changing the width of the light source. So you can go from a full 360 degrees. That means when you place this asset down, it will cover and spill out a light to 360 degrees around it. Or you can begin limiting that range by moving the circle inward, and it creates two separate circles that then stretch out from the light source itself. You can also use the slider over here as well. If you wish to change a specific property, you can see how that is changing on the fly as we go. Dark circle in the middle controls the masking, which means that it creates an area around the object emitting from its center outward of an area that no light will be visible. So if you're creating a light source, perhaps on top of something that you want it to be emitted out, but not on the bottom, let's say, or you want to increase the amount of masking that that light source has on it, then all you have to do is select this circle in the middle of the asset and then begin pulling it out towards the outer circle, and you can see that that masking circle gets larger and larger, which means that any object within that darkened circle will not be affected by the light source, which can be pretty useful if you're doing things on the interior, but I won't get into the specific applications of how you can utilize the lighting tool, just what each function will do, and then it'll be up to you guys to really figure out how you want to start incorporating the lighting tool in terms of the maps that you're making out there. Again, you can actually manually adjust that by changing the feet down here in this section below, but sometimes you might want a little bit more generic or general, in which case this sliding feature will do just fine. Any kind of extra precision work, I recommend using any of these features within the lighting tool itself when you're selecting an object. This circle out here, the white circle, will change the direction, and we can move it from 180 degrees to where it's at right now, to 89 degrees, to 354. Basically what this does is this lets you grab a hold of the light source and actually drag it around to a specific direction you want it to face if you're looking at something creating more directional lighting, which is where this tool can come into as well. If you're creating something that has a lot of masking, you can create more of a specific light source rather than something that just spills out light in its entirety. Put that back, and we'll extend it out again. If you want to move the asset, you can simply grab the circle that surrounds the white circle on the far outside of the light source, and you can select and hold that, and you can actually begin moving the light source around. You can see it actually will populate out there. You only have a certain range from an object that you can move it, so that is what's changing the back, front, and left and right percentages anywhere from 0 to upwards of plus or minus 1,000 is about the extent that you can move the object around from its light source. So you can see here, I'm moving it around. The values on the back, front, left, and right are moving as the light source itself is being moved around within that specific area. Prop shadows is simply if you want to actually have the light source creating shadows on receivers. So to better illustrate how the shadows feature works when you're working with the dynamic lighting tool, we're actually going to move away from this particular map, and we're just going to put a couple of assets into a nice open area so you can see exactly how everything is interacting with each other. Okay, so what I've done is I've just placed a couple of assets just outside of the area of the map that we are working in, just to show you a little bit more how lighting and shadows and props all interact with each other. So, starting with our light source, we're going to select this asset right here, the burning torch, coming down to the arrange. Now, one thing I do want to mention, specifically when you are working with DungeonFog, that I definitely needed to mention in another video, is that whatever changes you are making to an object, specifically when you're placing it down as an asset, DungeonFog will carry that change over. So specifically for the layering, I designated all of the assets I put down as a map decoration, so I actually had to go back in and change all of those over to having be regular props. So when I placed down this lighting source, it was actually as a map decoration, which means lighting and GM tools are not available for it. It is just something that exists on the map just to add a little bit of flavor, but doesn't interact with anything. So just a reminder on that when you're placing a new asset down, make sure that it's doing what you want it to do on the layering section. So we want it as a regular layer, which means it's going to function normally as a prop where we can then adjust its lighting feature. I just changed over the pillar to a regular asset as well instead of a map decoration, which means that when I select this light source, it will then begin interacting with the pillar in a style that I want it to. So we can see that the direction is kind of not where I want it to be. It's a little bit omnidirectional. So we are just going to swing that light source around here like so. And let's extend it out so it's actually going to encompass that pillar. Perfect. Okay. Now we're going to come down to our lighting tools. We want prop shadows. We do want this to emit light, and it's going to give me a color property of the kind of light that it's emitting. Again, you can use this radial color wheel here to change those properties of color as you see fit. Something a little bit more generic or specific based on what you want your light source to look like. When we are looking at the lighting tool, here is how a light source and a light receiver will interact. So I'm currently selecting my light source. It is not a light receiver, and it will not cast a shadow. That's fine. This is my light source. I want it to emit light, and this is the color that it defaults to based on this asset. So what I want to do now is I want to go over to my object that will be the receiver. So I'm going to go over to my pillar. I'm going to select the pillar. Now I have the ability to start manipulating it. Do I want it to be a light source? I do not. So I'm just going to hide that whole section right away. Do I want this object to cast a shadow? Absolutely I do. And as second I click that, you can see that now a shadow is being emitted and cast from behind the object. Now I can increase that shadow length if I want using a slider down here. So we'll leave it at 100 just so that you guys can see it easily enough. Now the light receiver shadows. So if your light receiver is flat, then that basically means that the light source and the object will interact normally, which means that if you have your object casting a shadow, it will be perfectly fine. It will cast a shadow behind the object and interact in such a way. So think of it flat as a flat surface or an object that is causing an obstruction that is then casting a shadow behind it. All right? I know it might sound a little confusing, but for all intents and purposes, if your light receiver is flat, that means that it will cast a shadow when it's designated to cast a shadow, and it will interact with your light source without any additional adjustments made on your part. You can have it as none, which means the object is not a light receiver in that sense, but it still casts a shadow, which means the object itself is kind of like it's not there, but it's still casting a shadow. But I can also turn that off, meaning that if the object is not casting a shadow and it's not a light receiver, then this light source will not interact with this object in any way. And you can actually see the asset getting lighter as soon as I designate it as a flat source. So it gets lit up when it's near a light source. If I choose none, it goes dark and does not receive any light whatsoever. Let's turn it back on flat here. So it's now interacting with our light source. It is receiving light as usual. We'll have it cast a shadow as usual. But now we're going to go flat, no prop shadow. What the flat, no prop shadow means is that it will receive light normally from the light source, but the object itself, your light receiver, will not cast a shadow around it. So if I click on that, right, notice how there's this illuminated area underneath the object. Well, that is because I have told DungeonFog that I want this object to receive light, cast a shadow, but the object itself to not have a shadow itself. So remember how when you place an asset down, you could have your drop shadow, which just creates a larger box around the asset itself and then creates a little shadowed area underneath it? Well, the flat no prop shadow takes that away, effectively, creating an object that still receives light, interacting with a light source, still casts a shadow because it's interacting with a light source, but itself does not cast a shadow in around its immediate placement. And one of the cool features about the dynamic lighting tool itself as well is the direction of the shadow will be in relation to the light source that it's receiving. If I have multiple light sources shining on a specific object, even if it's going to cast a shadow, it can't, because the system can't designate how to create a shadow when there's multiple light sources from different angles hitting it. So bear that in mind when you're placing your light sources down, if you're trying to create shadows with those objects. But if I moved it over here, suddenly the light's cast behind it. So the light will always be cast behind the object, but you're just choosing where that direction for the shadow is going. I can have it cast down there, straight forward, which is a very clear sign of which direction the light source is affecting this object. Inside the lighting tool specifically is fairly simple adjustments that you can make, starting with the hide all lights toggle. If I click on that, everything goes dark. Everything that's designated a light source gets completely masked out. Anything that's casting a shadow gets completely masked out. Everything, all light sources, gone. I find hiding all lights, placing assets down first, and then going back and making my tweaks with all my lighting afterwards, much better. Stage lighting can go from 0 to 100%. This means that I am changing the lighting of anything that isn't separated by a wall. So essentially all of our green space out here, if I were to adjust our stage lighting, notice how it's getting darker and darker as we go to complete darkness, or bring it back up. Same thing with the room lighting. Now, because I only have the one room right now, it's going to affect the room lighting, the ambient lighting of this room. Makes it a lot easier to see shadows too when you're working with less ambient light as well. But you can have that whacked up to 100% if you feel like that serves your map's purposes. So there we go, guys. That is a very, very brief overview of the lighting tool, lighting feature within DungeonFog. If you have any questions, always let me know in the comments down below, and I will gladly respond to them. Maybe do some one-on-one time, maybe put an additional video out for you guys as well if you need me to go over something that I've done so far and explain it in a little bit more detail. If you guys are not subscribed to the channel, you can always do so by hitting the subscribe button down below. Make sure that you have the bell notification turned on so you know that when I upload a new video, you get notified of that. You can always catch my live streams on twitch.tv/EsquireVT. I'd love to have you guys come and check out and see what's going on the channel. I really appreciate all the support, guys, with these videos. Thank you so, so much, and I'll see you guys in the next video.